Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Story Time with Rob. I hope everybody is having a good week. It is, Thursday right now, so it is almost Friday, thank God. I am ready for the weekend. I'm ready to have some drinks and some hanging out and all that good stuff. So I hope everybody's doing great. If you are just now listening to this, if it's your first time ever listening, this is called Story Time with Rob, where I just sit back and we just listen to some old stories like it's by the fire pit at the campground. You just listen to me tell the story. So let's get into it. All right, guys. Okay, so this happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something I'll never forget, and it gives me goosebumps to this day. I lived in a terraced house. It's 4 houses combined, and my neighbors and I each have our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks and so on. Only a small fence separates my yard and patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area with several of these terraced houses spread around in my neighborhood, so seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I lived maybe 50 meters away from school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be at home alone for an hour before she got home. This one day I got home from school. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure I locked the front door and double-check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. I was 9, so being alone was a little scary, even though it was only in the middle of the day and just for an hour. I then rushed to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and made me do homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside of my window. My room was located 1 floor over the patio, with a view to the road I told you about before. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked and I thought, oh my God, did he finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it was my cat, but the sight that met me gives me goosebumps just writing this. There was a guy standing on my patio. A tall guy with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring Woman or something. I could hear him making high-pitched sounds, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen observing this, eventually snapped out of it, and I screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react. He just kept eating from the ashtray. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in bed under my sheets, shivering with fear, as I hear these creepy high-pitched noises from the guy eating cigarette stumps from the ashtray on my patio. I kind of blacked out for a moment because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy, saying stuff like, "What are you doing? Get over here, we'll come down and arrest you," and so on. He didn't respond, but the high-pitched sound was more frequent and louder. I decided to look through the window, feeling safe now that the cops were there. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence. 1 man and woman. I did not see the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me of my field of view. The police jumped the fence. I remember the creepy guy screaming louder than anything I've ever heard before. He charged the female police officer with full force, and he fucking knocked her out cold. The male officer then immediately tased the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, screaming still. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually made it. After a while, he managed to wake up the female police officer who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else because he just looked at me and said, "I sure as hell hope you didn't see all that." I started to cry. By this time, the neighbors started arriving, wondering what in the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down and she took care of me until my mom came back home. The police took the creepy guy with them in the car and left. Before that, they promised to come back and talk to us about what happened. This is where the story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped a facility where mentally challenged people live, located around 5 kilometers from where I live. He explained that the guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but he had been forced to move when his mom, his only caretaker, died. The poor guy probably thought he would find his mom in my house. He missed the routines, and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago because he was extremely strong. From what I heard, he had extreme tensions in the body because of the autism, making his muscles grow stronger and stronger throughout the years. This was the reason he reacted the way he did when the police came that day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that he needed to make sure this would never happen again. He promised it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life got back to normal. The years went by and the guy didn't come back. Until 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out. I had bought the house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stands there looking at me. I look at him and give him a nod. Then I hear the high-pitched noises. Holy shit, it's him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize. My heart started racing, and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to escape again. Because I kept cool a bit longer than I was when I was 9, I started to realize how sorry I felt for the guy. 16 years later, and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think he would knock me out like he did to that police officer. He didn't. He smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I offered him to sit down. He didn't respond. I offered him to come inside. He started laughing. We went inside. His face lit up, pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mom, and it almost made me tear up. All of a sudden, he sat down in my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on the cartoons. I just wanted him to enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything to him. I realized I had to call the facility to let them know. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. And after a lot of convincing, he got back up, crying, and they went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later. We made a deal. His name is Tom. I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday, from the day he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They say it's the highlight of his week. It makes my heart warm. Now, for several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. But now my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons. My friend Tom. This past Monday, my coworkers and I returned to our hotel from a day of work out in the field. Rebecca and I walked to our rooms. As we stood outside of our rooms, I opened mine and I saw someone in the bathroom. I said, "Hello?" Nobody answered. My first instinct was that it was a cleaning lady in there for some reason. And then I saw my bag with my clothes in her hands. I said to my coworker, "There's a woman in my room." Then I asked the woman, "What are you doing with my stuff?" It gets a little fuzzy here because I can't remember everything I said and what she said, but she kept mumbling about how her key still worked, how it still worked, and that's how she got in. I was in shock, and she was obviously very flustered, having been caught mid-robbery. She dropped my bags and fumbled around with her purse and with plastic bag. By this time, my coworker was behind me watching all the insanity unfold. This woman was scrambling and walking towards the door, and I said, "What's in the bag?" Thinking it was probably my stuff, and so she said, No, it's just my things. It's just my things, I'll show you." And so she did. I looked, and I didn't see anything of mine, so since I'm obviously in shock at the time, I let her leave. I went into my room, and it had been ransacked. I did a quick look around to see if anything had been taken. All my electronics were still there. Then I went into the bathroom, and I saw my underwear, my bikini, and my clothes shoved into my own bags randomly. Even my passport was shoved in there. Then I looked on the counter, and I saw that she got into my medication. I'm not sure what was going through my head at that moment other than I wanted it back, so I ran out the door to find her. I ran to the laundry room downstairs and out to the sides of the hotel, and I didn't see her. I realized I was never going to find her, so my coworker and I went to the lobby to tell them what had happened, then we called the police. We went back up to my room to wait, and I noticed that there was a metal bat on my bed, a little larger than one of those novelty wooden bats you can get at a baseball game, but there's also a flashlight on the end. She must have left it behind in a hurry. She also left behind a necklace that must have fallen out of her bag when she was scrambling with mine. I was mostly freaking out at this point because I thought that she had gotten away with my medication that I need. The police got there and took our statements and looked around the room as well. One thing that I noticed was that there were bits of drywall in the sink, and I pointed that out to the cops, but none of us really knew where it came from. We started looking at the door and the windows to see if she'd pried her way in somehow, but there was nothing. So we kind of just went with the idea that she had a spare key or something, even though the hotel front desk was adamant that there's no way that could be. The officer that came brought 2 more officers as backup because they thought the woman might still be in the vicinity. But after our statements were taken, there was nothing else they could do, so they left. I sat down to finally make some calls to tell people, and as I'm on the phone, I'm thinking about the drywall in the sink and how it didn't make sense to me. So I'm on the phone, and I'm looking at the drywall and the mirror on the wall right above it. And then it hit me. I got my coworker and I asked her to help me pull this mirror on the wall. We took the mirror down, and there was a hole there just big enough for a desperate junkie to squeeze through. I asked Brian and Rebecca if I should call the cops again to let them know that I found this, and my boss said, "There's still 2 cop cars in the parking lot." So I went down to tell them, and the female cop kind of rolled her eyes, but the young guy said, "I'll come check it out." They both came back up, looked in the hole, and found a pillow, blankets, cigarettes, clothes, toothbrushes. This woman had been living in the wall behind my mirror for God knows how long. She had access to me and my room at all times. I know it might be hard to picture, but there was a crawl space about 2 feet wide in between 2 rows of rooms. One of the officers called the original officer to come back to take the picture of this. She explained to him what was going on, and all I hear over the radio is, "No fucking way." He comes back, takes pictures, and is just as mind blown as the rest of us. Obviously, we pack up and left immediately. What's even crazier is she has probably been there a long time. The last time we stayed at this hotel, I would randomly smell cigarette smoke, and I assumed someone was smoking in their bathroom and it was traveling through the vents. But nope, a junkie was smoking just on the other side of my mirror. She had access to other rooms too. The holes in the walls were just a renovation, and the hotel hadn't properly patched and just covered up with mirrors. She could have been hanging out in people's rooms when they were gone. Anyways, this was insane, and I'm taking a little time off. I grew up in Ohio in the 1970s, and me and my childhood friend Joe were outside all the time that we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. We'd only come out for school. We loved pretending we were frontiersmen. We'd build shelters, traps, practice making fire with sticks, the whole 9 yards. When we got to be in high school, we got this notion to pull a Stand By Me. This was based on the movie the same name that had just come out. The idea was that we'd walk the railroad tracks out in the country. But instead of looking for a dead body, we'd find cool bridges to fish from and camp a little ways off the tracks. Of course, we knew this was dangerous, and we'd likely be trespassing, but we were kids. We had a lot of fun. We did find beautiful rivers. We discovered bridges that no one went to. We fished. We hid from trains. At night, we camped in the woods just near the tracks and made a small hidden fire. Nothing bad ever happened. It was idyllic. In fact, it was so fun that we did it multiple times, never had a problem. After high school, me and Joe went our own ways. We both left home, but always stayed in touch and always tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. Well, one summer in the mid-90s, it worked out that we were both in town for about a week. We'd do stuff with the family in the day, and at night we'd catch drinks at the bar or just sit outside Joe's house around a fire and talk about the old days. One night, me and Joe got talking about our Stand By Me trips. Well, nostalgia and beers are a hell of a mix. Soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came. We started out early morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, Joe suggested that instead of walking the usual route, we take the opposite direction, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well, we had a map, so I gave up, what the hell, and off we set. The day went fine. It was fun and a little sad, but in a good way. We found a bridge and sat on the edge, smoked a joint, and moved on. We had no fishing gear, but we brought some canned food and other stuff. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train track, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We'd brought a small hammock to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. Now this is what we used to do in the good old days too. We'd walk the area around a little bit just to make sure some dude's house wasn't just over the hill and we were actually camping in their yard. We walked maybe 100 or so feet into the woods, up a small incline. We figured if we didn't see anything from the top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. It was barely visible. We pondered over what to do. We both assumed it was a sugar shack or something because there didn't appear to be a cleared road to it. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet. No movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. It was a squat, sagging building whose wooden planks were almost black from years of moss and rot. A cross still stood at the top of the place, also weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for the preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up to the hill to our spot that we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness of seeing a church in the middle of the woods that it would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk and we were just deciding to set our rig up and our hammocks and go to sleep and just move at that early morning. Night set in. As we lay in our hammocks and shot the shit, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about went like this. Do you hear that? What the fuck is that? It sounds like people singing. And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. We could still move very quietly in the woods from the old days. It was second nature to us. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. Joe and I put our heads close together and had a hushed conversation that boiled down to, "Can you believe this shit?" The light looked to be candlelight from the way that it flickered. Though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw an occasional shadow. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared the shit out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point, I was just getting ready to say, "Let's get the fuck out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out of the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move towards us and the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our shit, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction that we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts and walk as fast as we could. We eventually stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. My wife and other friends all just thought it was kids messing around. But I heard those voices, and they sure as hell didn't sound like kids to me. Not sure who those people were, but it was definitely the creepiest thing that happened to me out in the woods. This happened 2 days ago. I live in a small city in Romania, about 30,000 inhabitants. Romania isn't exactly known for their tolerance of gay people. It's not as bad as other places, such as Russia, but the situation is definitely not rosy here either. I get on Grindr and meet a guy. 18 years old, apparently. The guy didn't have a picture of his face as his profile picture, because it's too dangerous. He had a picture of a rose drawing. Most guys on Grindr here don't have pictures of themselves. We talked for a bit, and I really liked the guy, and we finally accept to exchange face pictures. I sent him a selfie of myself, and he sends me a picture of a guy from their city. He was cute, and I really liked him, so I told him, "Hey, I saw you around the city. Didn't know you were gay too." Smiley face. We talk and finally arrange to meet. I had some errands to run at the tailor shop. My cousin's bachelorette party is coming next week, and I had to adjust my favorite shirt, so I asked to meet him out in front of the tailor shop. The building in which the tailor shop is located is 4 stories. The ground floor is a clothes shop, which my aunt works at. The first floor is a storage room. The 3rd floor is a barber salon, and the 4th floor was a tailor shop. I go to the tailor shop, and then I go to the clothes shop on the ground floor to visit my aunt and see how she was doing. As I was looking out of the window of the clothes shop, I noticed there were 5 men, all of them in their late 20s behind the building. None of them was the guy I got a picture of, and none of them even looked remotely close to what the guy looked like. I texted the guy that I was supposed to meet and asked him if he made it to the tailor shop. And as soon as I sent the message, one of the 5 guys' phones lit up. He started texting. As soon as he stopped texting, I got a notification from Grindr. "I'm behind the tailor shop. I went there to smoke so no one would see me. Come smoke with me." I was terrified as I realized I wasn't going to meet the guy in the picture. He tries to get me to go behind the tailor shop, and I tried to get to the side of it. There were no windows to the side of the building, so after a few tries, he agrees to meet me at the side of the tailor shop. All 5 guys went to the side of the tailor shop. I peeked my head from the door, looked left and right, and as soon as I saw the way was clear, I ran for it. Grindr cutie, let's not meet. And there you have it. That wraps up this episode of Storytime with Rob. I hope you all enjoyed, and until next time,